Hello everyone! Today we're going to do a complete TOEFL listening section and find out what your score will be on the day of the test. We'll listen to 2 conversations and 3 lectures and answer questions after each. As you answer the questions, keep track of how many answers you got right. And let me know your final score in the comments below. Also, write down which lecture or conversation you found most challenging. Let's get started. Conversation 1.
Listen to a conversation between a student and a librarian.
Hi. I need to get into special collections, in particular the British literature. I was working with some of the William Blake books.
Well, then you must know that access is restricted.
I was in a seminar with Professor Gray, and she authorized access for us.
Oh, if that's the case, let me check. Right, yeah, but it looks like that expired at the end of last semester.
But I really need to get back in there. See, I didn't quite finish my project.
Aha, the plot thickens. Well, it's easy enough. Have Professor Gray authorize you again. You see, these editions are rare and shouldn't be handled more than necessary. Can you work from later editions or microfilm?
Not really. Actually, my project, well, it involves some annotations in the particular edition here. They haven't been reproduced because they're really not part of the text. You know, they generally clean them up. They're quite hard to see.
Well, often the characteristics of the manuscripts have been recorded. These types of extraneous markings might also be noted.
I don't think they are. They're very faint, and, well, I think I have a new angle on them. There was a study once a long time ago about these notes that everybody else has since taken for granted without checking for themselves. I think there might have been a mistake in the past, that they were misread.
So, get Professor Gray.
She's away this semester. I had to beg her to give me extra time on this project. I haven't even received a grade in the class yet, and this class is a prerequisite for other classes in my major. I really need to see those books so I can finish up this project and get back on course to graduate on time.
Everybody has special circumstances.
2 hours? 1 hour? I promise to be careful. I just need to look at a few pages with a strong magnifying glass.
Well, I can't let you in without authorization from your professor. Can you get in touch with her somehow?
Maybe she's checking her email. I really thought I'd be able to straighten this out without her. You know, she did me a huge favor by giving me the extra time. I feel like I'm skating on thin ice with her.
You know, you were lucky to have had permission to look at the books last semester. If we don't maintain our policies, they'll disintegrate.
I know. Would an email from her or a phone call be good enough?
Of course.
That's the end of the first conversation. Now it's time to answer the questions. As we go through them, you can pause the video if you need more time to think, and then I'll reveal the correct answer. You won't have this option on the day of the test, but I think it's the best way to practice. This way, you can analyze your mistakes on the spot.
What are the speakers mainly discussing?
The right answer is C. The student's request to visit a particular part of the library.
Why is the student unable to use later editions or reproductions of a book he mentions?
D is correct. Reproductions typically omit the specific material the student needs.
Why is the student reluctant to contact Professor Gray?
The right answer is B. He does not feel comfortable about asking her for another favor.
What does the woman imply about the rules regarding special collections?
B is correct. The rules are in place to protect the books.
Listen again to part of the conversation, then answer the question.
I really need to see those books so I can finish up this project and get back on course to graduate on time.
Everybody has special circumstances.
What does the woman mean when she says this?
Everybody has special circumstances.
When the woman says, "Everybody has special circumstances," she means that she's often heard this kind of story from students. So C is right. One part of the listening section covered. Congratulations! If you made any mistakes, be sure to analyze them. There are usually a couple of reasons for mistakes. First, your listening skills aren't up to par. In this case, you can use the daily dictation website to improve them. Second, you don't know the question types and what to listen for in the recordings. In this case, you should carefully study the listening question types and also analyze the transcripts. You can do this on this website. Third, you have problems with note-taking. This is the most common problem the TOEFL test takers have. In my one-on-one sessions, I often see students who have amazing listening skills and can understand lectures and conversations perfectly, but can't consistently get high scores on the listening section. So they take tests over and over and can't get their target score. If you feel that note-taking is not your strong point, enroll in the TOEFL prep course I created and go straight to the listening section block. We'll go over question types, discuss conversation and lecture notes, and do listening tests together. However, unlike this test, we'll also stop after each question and discuss why a certain answer is correct and how to avoid mistakes. The link is below. Let's move on to the first lecture.
Listen to part of a lecture in an education class. The professor is discussing the Italian educator, Maria Montessori.
Okay, if you did your reading for today, then you were introduced to a very influential alternative to traditional education. This educational philosophy and methodology was pioneered in Italy in the early 1900s by Dr. Maria Montessori. It's called the Montessori method. But what made the Montessori method for young children so different? What made it so different, so special?
It's based on very different ideas about how kids learn best, right?
It was groundbreaking. To begin with, unlike the traditional classrooms at the time, the Montessori classroom environment was more suited to the child. The furniture was child-sized. Well, it's that way in almost all schools now, but that wasn't always the case. We can thank Montessori for this. You won't see any long benches with children in rows or heavy desks that separate children. Children are free to interact with each other. And in Montessori classrooms, the furniture is lightweight, so children can move it around easily. And having furniture and materials made to fit them makes kids feel more competent. This fits in with Montessori's notion of liberty and autonomy. Children are free to move around the room, and they learn to do things for themselves.
I'm not sure I get that part. It sounds like potential chaos.
Oh, no. Let's not confuse this liberty of activity with lack of discipline. In fact, teachers have to maintain this specific environment carefully through a number of rules, which are generally about respect and what's right. It's just that the child needs freedom of choice to develop independence and self-direction. Also, unlike what happens in most conventional classrooms, children choose their own activities. They may be guided by the teacher, but it's ultimately up to each child to select tasks, which brings us to the manipulative equipment you find in a Montessori classroom, like little boards that have rough or smooth surfaces, or blocks that can be stacked into a tower. Now, this equipment was designed by Montessori over time with much experimentation, designed to help children teach themselves through playing.
Well, what do the teachers do? I mean, if the kids are teaching themselves.
That's a good question. To start, a child may not work with an activity until the teacher has demonstrated its proper use. Then the Montessori teacher's job is to observe the child's play, because when the children play, they're acquiring the basis for later concepts. So the teacher helps motivate and focus each child and monitors the child's progress, but does not interfere with the child's observations and deductions. That was, and still is, a novel idea, and for many teachers, not the easiest thing to do. In fact, for some it's very difficult. Montessori herself called the teacher a director. Remember, the independence of the learner lies at the heart of the Montessori methodology.
Okay. Yeah, it does seem like the teacher'd need a lot of training and patience.
True. As I said, it's not easy for a lot of teachers to step back like that. But getting back to the equipment, basic Montessori equipment can be divided into a number of major subject areas such as practical life, mathematics, and what is called sensorial. With the sensorial equipment, the children can explore things like sounds and textures. At the same time, they develop motor skills. But this apparent play is laying the groundwork for later math and language work. Now let's take a look at the materials called brown stairs. For a young child playing with these graduated blocks, these brown stairs, they are not just a sensorial lesson. By manipulating them, the child develops fine motor skills, and by sorting and classifying them by size, by weight, the child learns some basic mathematics. Similarly, with practical life equipment, the child can learn how to button a shirt, cut up an apple for a snack, and other real-world tasks.
With all this integration and real-world learning, is there any room for creativity?
Is creativity encouraged? Well, Montessori teachers wouldn't praise a child for using a violin as a baseball bat or for putting it on their head like a hat, but actually creativity comes through learning to play the violin, using the object for the purpose it was intended, and practical life exercises stress that.
How was that? Time to answer the questions.
What is the lecture mainly about?
The first question of every lecture is what it's about. It's important to remember that the main idea of the lecture is not always given at the beginning of the lecture. For example, in this lecture, the professor says that she's going to talk about Maria Montessori, which is not specific enough. But then she mentions that Montessori's approach was different, special, and groundbreaking. So simply put, it was different from the traditional approach. Then the professor gives examples of how different it was and explains why this method was better. This means that C, how the Montessori method facilitates children's development, is correct. If you have doubts about the right answer, you can always start by eliminating the options that are definitely wrong. For example, it's definitely not A or D. The lecture didn't discuss in detail how the children responded to the Montessori method, nor did it mention how Maria developed her educational method. Then, you'll just have to choose between B and C. By the way, the lecture mentioned conventional classroom, which is a synonym for traditional classroom. The word conventional appears quite often on the TOEFL test, so if you don't know it, feel free to add it to your vocabulary list. You can also watch this video where I discuss the most common words you'll need on the TOEFL.
What does the professor imply about the furniture that was traditionally found in children's classrooms in the early 1900s?
This question asks us about the furniture that was traditionally found in children's classrooms in the early 1900s. The right answers are A, C, and D. It did not encourage interaction among children. It was heavy and difficult for children to move, and it was not child-sized.
According to the professor, what is the primary goal of the Montessori teacher?
The primary goal of the Montessori teacher was to guide the child to learn skills and concepts independently, so D is correct. This may be a tricky question. The lecturer says that children must choose their own activities. Yes, they can be guided by the teacher, but they should be able to choose the tasks themselves. Then the lecturer says that the teacher's role is first to show children how to play, then watch them play and monitor their progress without interfering. So the focus is on children's independence, which is why D is correct.
What is the professor's attitude about the Montessori teacher's role?
The right answer is C. She thinks it could be a difficult role to perform.
What does the example of the brown stairs demonstrate about Montessori classroom materials?
D is correct. That one set of materials can be used to introduce several skills. If you remember this part of the lecture, brown stairs were given as an example of sensorial equipment. The lecturer says that they help children develop fine motor skills and teach them basic math. When I checked my notes, I'd written something like this: brown stairs, motor skills, basic math. As you can see, effective notes are very important during the listening section, especially when it comes to lectures. They don't only help us to answer questions. Very often, you can choose the right answer because you have understood the lecture well. But taking notes also helps you stay focused and prevents your mind from wandering. If you've done even a few practice listening tests, you've probably noticed that when the lecture gets too long, you can easily lose concentration and skip some important details, even if it's just for a few seconds.
Why does the professor mention the violin?
Finally, the last question. A and D are correct. We've finished our first lecture. Congratulations! Now it's time to move on to the second conversation.
Listen to a conversation between a student and a professor.
Oh, hi, Melanie. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. I just have some questions about this paper for your class. Do you have a second to talk about it now?
Oh, yes, no problem. I have about 20 minutes before my next class. Will that be enough time?
Yeah, I think so. Okay, so the thing is, I'm writing my paper on the history of jazz in New York City.
All right, well, that's a pretty broad subject.
Well, actually, I'm focusing on a specific decade, the 50s, and I'm only doing it on a few specific artists.
Oh, okay. Because I was going to say that seemed a bit, too ambitious for a 10-page paper.
Yeah, no, it's not the subject I'm having trouble with. Actually, the paper is practically writing itself. I mean, I've got a lot to say, and it's going pretty well. The thing is, I have this idea that might make it better, and I was wondering if there's any way I could get an extension. I mean, I know it's due next week, right?
That's right, on Monday. But I don't understand. It sounds like you're doing so well. Why do you need more time?
Yeah, well, I could write the paper as it is and turn it in on time, and it would be fine.
But
I was just talking to one of my friends whose family has lived in New York forever, and it turns out that her grandfather was actually there in the period of jazz I'm writing about. I mean, he was a jazz musician, and he actually, personally knew the artists I'm writing about.
you're kidding. Well, that's a coincidence.
Yeah, I know, it's cool, right? So anyway, that's why I was wondering if I could get an extension, because I thought it would be really great if I could, interview him for my paper.
Ah.
But I don't think I can meet with him until early next week, so...
Ah, I see. Well, it would certainly add a new dimension to your paper, wouldn't it? Have you talked to this gentleman yet?
No. But I talked to my friend, just, ran the idea past her, and she said he would probably love to do it. But, he's busy until next week.
Okay, well, yeah. I think that in this case, we can definitely extend your deadline until, let's say, Friday next week.
Okay, that would be great.
But just to be fair, why don't you turn in an outline of your paper on the due date?
The outline? Oh, that's no problem. It's basically done, except for the parts about the interview.
Oh, yeah, the interview. Could you have the questions ready then, too? The ones you're planning on asking?
Sure, yeah, I can do that, too.
And then I'll expect the final draft next Friday.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Sure, I'm looking forward to reading it.
Why does the student go to see the professor?
D is correct. The student goes to the professor to ask for more time to finish her paper. As you can see, it's also great to know campus vocabulary for conversations. In our TOEFL course, we have a list of this vocabulary because it's difficult to follow many conversations without it. For example, you should know words like get an extension, due date, turn in your assignment, and so on.
What can be inferred about the student's work on her paper so far?
B is the right answer. She's found enough information to complete the paper.
Why does the student want to interview her friend's grandfather?
The right answer is D. He was a jazz musician during the 1950s.
What does the professor ask the student to do on the original due date of the paper?
Here, B and C are correct. Again, you might be tempted to choose A because you heard the verb to turn in. However, the professor says that she should turn in the outline of her paper, not the first draft. So B and C are the correct answers.
Listen again to part of the conversation, then answer the question.
Okay, so the thing is, I'm writing my paper on the history of jazz in New York City.
All right, well, that's a pretty broad subject.
Well, actually, I'm focusing on a specific decade, the 50s.
Why does the student say this?
Well, actually, I'm focusing on a specific decade.
The student says, well, actually, I'm focusing on a specific decade to address the professor's concern. So A is correct. Remember that a decade is a period of 10 years. Moving on, Lecture 2.
Listen to part of a lecture in a biology class.
Okay, so that's how the Arctic ground squirrel is able to cope in this extreme environment. Now let's talk about your reading assignment about reindeer, also typically found in Siberia and other far northern regions. Who'd like to start off? Yes, Mike?
Well, for one thing, they've got thick hair all over their body, even on their noses.
Yes, they're very well insulated, and the thickness of their fur varies depending on the season. Good. Yes?
Newborn reindeer are very adult-like. Like they can stand as soon as they're born. And by their second day, they can already run as fast as a human.
Critical. Food is very scarce in the far north, so reindeer herds have to cover lots of ground every day. And in the fall, they might easily trek 1,000 kilometers or more to get to their winter feeding site. So if you're a newborn, you've got to get up to speed fast. Okay. Other adaptations?
Also, reindeer don't have to keep their legs as warm as their main body, so they don't have to use up as much energy keeping them warm.
Yes. So that means they can allocate less energy to heating their extremities and more energy to maintaining a stable temperature in their body core, where their vital organs are located. And, I don't think it's mentioned in your textbook, but even different parts of a reindeer's leg are adapted for optimal cold weather performance. The fat in the lower part of their legs, the part that gets coldest, that fat has a different chemical structure from the fat in the upper parts of the leg, so it doesn't get hard, even at temperatures down around freezing. It stays kind of gel-like, kind of oily. Okay, good. What about food? What do you remember about that?
Well, they're pretty flexible.
Okay. Can you explain that a little more?
Well, they can eat a lot of different kinds of plants, so that improves their chances of coming across something they can eat. I think they said that they found that the reindeer in one herd had eaten something like 37 different kinds of plants.
Okay, yes. You've really done your reading. And reindeer also eat a number of different plant species that most animals are not very interested in, which means
they don't have a lot of competition when it comes to that food?
That's right. In particular, your reading mentions lichens. Lichens are plants you'll find growing on rocks in the far north, sometimes referred to as reindeer moss. They look pretty basic, just a little moss on a rock. But lichens are actually quite complex. They're not just a single organism. They're actually a kind of combination of some sort of a fungus and some sort of algae that live together in a symbiotic relationship. Anyway, okay, reindeer. Yes, and one more thing about lichens. They crank out a lot of chemicals, which is probably at least part of the reason why they're not considered all that tasty by most animals. Anyway, does anyone remember what your reading said about them?
Yeah, somehow when reindeer eat lichens, they're able to draw a lot more nutrients from them than other animals. Like if a cow or a sheep eats lichens, they're only going to get like half as much nutrition out of them as a reindeer would.
That's right. And in winter, lichens are crucial for reindeer because they supply energy. But they don't have all the proteins and minerals the reindeer need. So when reindeer get to the end of the long winter, they're often very thin, with low levels of minerals. In spring, they have to eat different plants and replenish what they've lost over the winter. So what reindeer have done is they've developed the ability to digest different plants in different seasons by adjusting the microbes in their digestive systems. As you know, microbes are microorganisms like bacteria that help to digest or break down food. And, well, what's interesting about reindeer is that they change the proportion of different microbes in their digestive system. So the reindeer might have more of one kind of microbe in winter to help digest the plants it eats then. And in the summer, it would have more of another kind of microbe to help it digest summer plants. That way, the reindeer gets more nutrition out of different foods at different times of the year.
As you've probably noticed, the lecture is very academic, which is why you need to know many advanced words to understand it. To do that, watch academic lectures or listen to podcasts on geology, astronomy, biology, and other topics. But if you don't understand every single word, don't panic. Make the most of the words you do know and try to guess the meaning of the others from context. Remember that the tasks you'll get do not require you to understand every single detail, but rather get a good understanding of the main points. Let's look at the questions.
What is the lecture mainly about?
The first question, as always, is about the main topic of the lecture. It's B. Adaptations that enable reindeer to live in the cold climates. The professor started the lecture by mentioning the Arctic ground squirrel, which was just to distract you. She then went back to the topic of the lecture and started talking about how reindeer can survive in cold climates.
According to the professor, why is it necessary for newborn reindeer to be able to walk and run almost immediately?
B is correct. Reindeer herds have to travel long distances every day.
What does the professor say about the lower part of a reindeer's legs?
The right answer is D. It contains fat that is different from the fat in the upper part of the leg. The lecturer said that the fat has a different chemical structure and stays kind of gel-like or oily.
What does the professor imply about lichens?
This question is about lichens. Lichens are plants that are similar to moss. The lecturer also says that lichens are very complex and are a combination of fungi and algae. So even if you don't know what lichens are, you can figure out the meaning from the lecture. But you'll need to know words like moss, fungus, and algae to do so. The correct answer is B. They're more abundant than other Arctic plants during the winter. Abundant means existing or being available in large quantities. Another popular word on the TOEFL test.
What does the professor say about the microbes in a reindeer's digestive system?
C is correct. The proportion of various microbes changes to accommodate changes in the reindeer's diet.
Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
But lichens are actually quite complex. They're not just a single organism. They're actually a kind of combination of some sort of a fungus and some sort of algae that live together in a symbiotic relationship. Anyway, okay, reindeer.
Why does the professor say this?
Anyway, okay, reindeer.
The professor said, anyway, okay, reindeer, because she wants to return to the main topic of the lecture. So C is correct. As you can see, this lecture is a bit more challenging, and we have a lot of academic vocabulary here. Some examples are abundant, lichens, to allocate. To allocate means to distribute. The lecturer mentioned how reindeer allocate less energy to heating their extremities. Now, extremities equal limbs in this context. By the way, let me know if you find this kind of video helpful and if you'd like to see more videos of the listening and reading tests in the future. The next video I've prepared for you is about my students' experiences. It's very helpful for those who are currently preparing for the test. So don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon to make sure you don't miss it. Finally, it's time for the last lecture.
Listen to part of a lecture in an archaeology class.
So if I ask you what most archaeologists do with all those pieces of broken pottery they find at excavation sites, you'd probably say that they help establish the time period of the site. Pretty obvious, huh? Pottery helps us order things in time to assign relative dates. Basically, when we date pottery, we look at its frequency at a given site. As you can probably surmise, styles of pottery vary over time in terms of how they're made, what they're made of, and what they were used for. So as archaeologists, we build up a picture, a sequence of how pottery changed over time, as well as how its popularity varied over time, which we can tell by the frequency of a style at a site, how many occurrences we find at a given site. But pottery can provide evidence about a lot of things, not just dating evidence, not just evidence of the time period that pottery was created. So there's also another type of evidence that we call distributional evidence. Okay, pottery is evidence of distribution. It, pottery, provides evidence that trade took place. Pots were traded for themselves or given as gifts, but even more often they changed hands because they were used as containers for food or wine. To fully understand how pottery is used as distributional evidence, we have to know its origin, where it was made. So how do we figure this out? Well, by studying what the pottery is made of. You look at the material that a pot's made of to know where it was made and its distribution. Okay, a third kind of evidence is evidence of function, the function of the site where the pottery was found, and sometimes about the lives of the people who lived there. Now this evidence is a bit tougher to interpret than the other two, and there are several reasons for this. First of all, pottery is usually not found in primary contexts. That is, it's often not found in the place where it was used. Think about your average town dump, the place where everyone's unwanted stuff ends up. Can you imagine archaeologists 1,000 years from now digging up a town dump and then using the items found there to get meaningful information about how the objects found there were used? Probably not. A second reason why function is harder to identify is that not all objects found in one spot can be assumed to have identical functions, even if they look similar. If you come across a collection of pots at a site, you need to work at the level of the group rather than the individual pots, because you can't assume that they all have the same function just because they were found in the same place. So this is where pottery's form comes into play. The form of a pot can give us some ideas about its function, the suitability of the pottery to serve a specific function. However, we have to be careful when it comes to skeuomorphs. These objects are copies of the designs of other objects, but in another material. And this can be problematic because sometimes the new or different material is not well suited to the design. A good example of this comes from 15th century Dutch ceramics. A bronze cauldron was copied in ceramic, including these sort of big angled handles. And while it worked well in bronze, it didn't work in the ceramic skeuomorph. Well, because the ceramic handles couldn't support the weight of the pot when it's full, it just couldn't function as it was intended to.
What is the lecture mainly about?
The lecture mentions that pottery helps assign relative dates, but it can provide evidence about a lot of other things, not just dating evidence. So C is correct. Kinds of archaeological evidence that pottery provides.
Why does the professor list several reasons that pots were traded?
A. to support her claim that pottery provides evidence of distribution.
According to the professor, what is one reason it is important to study the material from which pottery was made?
B. It can help archaeologists establish where the pottery came from.
According to the professor, why is it difficult to gain information on the function of a pot?
A and D are correct. Not all pots found in the same location have the same function, and pots are rarely found in the places in which they were used.
What is a skeuomorph?
A skeuomorph is an object with a similar function as another, but with a different design, so A is the right answer.
Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
So if I ask you what most archaeologists do with all those pieces of broken pottery they find at excavation sites, you'd probably say that they help establish the time period of the site. Pretty obvious, huh?
Why does the professor say this?
Pretty obvious, huh?
The professor says, pretty obvious, huh? Because she expects that the students are already familiar with the point about how archaeologists use pottery. So A is again correct. That was the listening section of the TOEFL. It's time to calculate your score. Write a winner in the comments below if you got all the questions correct. If you made mistakes, let me know which conversations and lectures were the most difficult and how many correct answers you got overall. If you're currently preparing for the test and want to check how ready you are, click here to get your writing and speaking scores. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more tips and tricks on how to ace the TOEFL. And remember, scoring 100 plus on the TOEFL isn't rocket science. It's the little things you do that make all the difference. As always, I wish you all a stellar TOEFL score. Until next time.